That's okay. Yeah, that was perfect. I just wanted to know how bad the attack actually was on the salmon. Whether they were really, nobody really remembers having this problem anymore. It's been so long since lamprey under control. So you gave some good perspective. And if you have any other stories about the level of lamprey predation when you came in, and if that changed, I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah, there were a lot of anecdotal things, and talking to fishermen and everything, they just said basically without lamprey control, we might as well give up on this program. It's just not going to work. There's not going to be enough survival. Some really great spawning streams down in that area. I don't think it was all stocking. A lot of reproduction eventually became natural, and they used these streams. There are some of the streams like Shelter Valley Creek and that were famous, in later years. So once lamprey control did take effect, and it was pretty immediate down in Lake Ontario, because we were able to target pretty well all the streams on both sides of the lakes. The New York side was another challenge too. They were very difficult treatments, some big rivers, and the benefits were pretty quickly noticed after a couple of rounds of treatment. So they decided then, of course, to carry on with the salmon planting and getting natural reproduction going. They used to have big fish derbies, and it was quite a successful program.
Great. That's perfect. And then another really cool thing I wanted to ask you about is we talked about like the control center here going and treating on the U.S. side quite a bit. I think it was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service treated one of the first rounds around Lake Ontario, or maybe just on the U.S. side. But then DFO started treating the full thing and continue to do that today. Can you tell us that story? And were there any problems with that? Were there the relationship between Canada and the U.S. and did that evolve at all? And fill us in on that story if you can.
Yeah, the first round of treatments on the U.S. side were conducted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and their nearest station was Ludington, Michigan, and Marquette, Michigan, even farther away than we were in some sense. And so it was determined that we should go down and do the treatments on both sides of Lake Ontario. And that was kind of a new thing, that Canadian employees working for the Canadian government would come into the United States and work. And I remember going through customs and things, and everything had to be documented, everything. And there were still lots of questions. Why are Canadians coming down? People actually asked us, "Are you stealing jobs from Americans coming over into the U.S. to work?" And but it became great, really. We worked really well with the state of New York, with their state fisheries management programs. We became very happy working down there. It was a long way from home, and I remember sometimes we were 8 weeks down there because it was such a long trip to come back. But overall, it worked well, and it was just kind of a new experience. Nothing like the later days where now crews travel back and forth, and our crews from Canada work right down in Michigan, right next to our doorstep. I always wondered why we didn't back in the early days go and help out on the Michigan side in some of the bigger treatments, where it's now quite commonplace to do so. But it was, there were different challenges, the customs and hauling lampricide back and forth across the border, lots of scrutiny. Different folks down there, a lot of them were used to fishing in streams. They fished for catfish. They fished for things. They weren't really that concerned about the trout, lake trout and things. That wasn't a big concern for a lot of them. So they kind of questioned what we were doing down there, even, But then there was still a strong number that really did want to go out and fish for those big salmon in Lake Ontario and that. So.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm interested in another thing too, the public perception, especially when you go into New York. I had chatted about this, and they became pretty big sport fishers, and you touched on a good point that they weren't before. They weren't doing that as much. Did the public perception? Can you tell me your experience, whether or not the public's perception of your treatments changed over time? Was there any stories that really tie that in, or any instances where you're like, starting to accept us? If you can talk about that.
Yeah, as we became quite successful with our control efforts in Lake Ontario, charter fishing opened up. Some of the centers in the United States, that became a big business. They were very happy that we were certainly down there controlling lamprey in those lower lakes. We